appreciate everybody being here tonight, especially our representatives that have come. As you know, this is a get to know your representatives night, and we're going to let you have the mic and voice some of your concerns. This is a friendly meeting. We all know we're all passionate about what's going on in our lives, and so we just want to make sure that, you know, we don't get too passionate up here. And we'd like to recognize somebody right now. Mike, where's Mike? Where'd he go?
He was downstairs.
I think he's directing people up here.
What's Mike's last name?
I think it's like
McCanish.
Mike McCanish, he comes to our meetings. I'm sure a lot of you recognize him when he comes up. He went the extra mile for us and emailed all the representatives besides each of us doing it, so that, you know, they could get the message that we'd really like them to be here, and we want them to know that we appreciate that very much. Okay, so how this is going to start. I'm too used to conducting church meetings. Oh, okay, so we're going to have a prayer. Although some of us might need it, right? So I think what I'm going to do is start by asking our representatives if they could stand and just where you're at, tell us who you are and what area you represent. Brian?
I'm Representative Brian Green. I live in Pleasant Grove. I represent District 57, which is Pleasant Grove and part of American Fork. And that must be Warren over there. Good to see you.
I'm Brad King. I represent District 69, which is Carbon, Emery, Grand, and Duchesne counties.
Oh, wow, thanks for coming up here.
I drug enough.
And Jim dragged me up. Yes.
And I'm a state representative, Mark Wheatley, and I represent Murray and South Salt Lake.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here tonight. Hopefully a few more will come in as we get started.
Give him like a go.
Yeah, come on out. Mike, you want to stand up for a second? Just for a second. Yeah. This is the gentleman that did all of our emailing for us. We'd just like to recognize him too. Okay, so without taking up any more time, how this is going to work is we have the list up here. You come up to the microphone. Please speak as clearly as you can. We are recording this. If you would like not to be recorded or be part of the video, just let my husband know. Rusty, raise your hand. Just tap him on the shoulder, and then we'll mark you on the list to make sure that you're edited out if we ever use this anywhere. And we certainly understand if you don't want to make your issues more public than we are right here. Anything else?
Oh, 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5. Right now we're going to start with 5. Rusty's the timer. He will raise his hand when you get to 4 minutes so that you know you have a minute left. Okay, so, and we are starting with Rebecca.
Can I make a note that we'd like to have, when you say who's going to speak first, Rebecca, could you say also, and on deck is?
He didn't let me get that far.
All right. I just went through this a week ago.
And on deck, Warren, and then is Althena here? Oh, good.
Didn't you sign up on the note?
Okay, so Rebecca, Warren, and Althena will be the first 3.
I just wanted to thank you for your time being here tonight and listening to our concerns. I really appreciate it. I understand how busy you are. I'll just tell you quickly my story. My husband was convicted of a first-degree felony. We didn't have the finances available to hire an attorney, so we went with the public defender. The public defender indicated to us that to take a plea deal, which we did, and that with that plea, it was a 3 to life sentence, and he indicated with the first offense and all of the positive things about it that he would not end up spending more than about 3 years. He was already in jail waiting for the sentencing for 10 months prior to that, and that his time would be used as credit served. So sounded like a really great deal, and we took it. Come to find out, once he was incarcerated, he wouldn't even go before the parole board for 4 years. At his hearing, he was given, when we met with the parole board member, he indicated, it shows here that you've already completed your time based on your matrix, which was 36 months. He'd already been in prison for 4 years and then another 10 months in jail. He said it appears that your time has already been served. You just need to complete the program. You've been a model inmate. Letters, support, anything that you can think of was given. Then we received the letter a couple weeks later of an additional 4 years. No explanation, no reason why, just another 4 years. So the topic that I like concerns me immensely is, why do we have a matrix if it's not being followed? Why are the parole members allowed to make that kind of doubling, more than doubling a sentence, and no responsibility to accountability to anybody? There's no reason why, there's nothing that makes any sense. And the more and more that we dig into this, the more that we realize that this may truly be, in fact, a life sentence, that we may never have the opportunity to be together as a family again. And it's, there again, no rhyme or reason, nothing that you can do about it. In hindsight, and as myself and my children deal with this not knowing, you're in a constant state of limbo. There is no moving forward, because you can't set a goal and say, oh, in X amount of time, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. We have no idea. We can't move forward. We're stuck. And it's a very difficult place to be in. It's very difficult for the children, as well as myself and my husband. In the book, Man's Search for Meaning, it indicates that one of the most tragic and cruelest forms of punishment is not ever knowing when this punishment will end. And that needs to stop. These life sentences need to stop. We need to stop with the indeterminate sentencing. And I would ask that something needs to be done with that, that we can have an end to it and something to look forward so the torture doesn't continue. And I thank you for your time.
Good evening, honored guests. Thank you for showing up. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll make this quick. I wrote down everything I could so I wouldn't miss points, but with 5 minutes, there's about 8,000 words that I could cover, and I'll do my best. My name is Warren Rosenbaum. I'm involved with UPAN, but I'm not necessarily speaking for them tonight as a representative. To add to my credibility, I worked for 8.5 years for the U.S. General Accounting Office, or the GAO, presently known as the Government Accountability Office. So I have some experience in audit and finance. The GAO reported to the Congress. We were critical of the executive branch of the government and how they spent the money, and our reports were to inform Congress how their appropriations were being handled. My initial plan for tonight was to point out in detail the common sense approach to reducing the Utah prison population by focusing on sex offenders who comprise about 1/3 of the population. By increasing the funding for sex offender treatment program known as SOTP, a smaller prison could be contemplated in the prison, and huge reductions in incarceration costs could be realized. There are over 1,000 inmates, I understand, that are over matrix waiting for SOTP. The cost of SOT is about $7,500 to clear a person for parole, and yet we're spending about $30,000 a year on incarceration. So it appears that that's a no-brainer, and I'll just let you do the math. Also, a detailed review of the SOTP therapy materials and the supervision needs to be done along with additional funding to reduce the population. The paperwork produced by the therapist is often so incorrect and misleading that it borders on criminal behavior. The paperwork is what the Board of Pardons and Parole bases their decisions upon. The decisions affect the life of a human being and more, as I'll mention in a moment. Contradictions abound, totally wrong statements are almost the norm. One example, my brother-in-law, Ernie, is rated as poor problem-solving skills and doesn't grasp how the SOTP assignment cycle works. In correspondence with him, I was writing to him about the orbit and gravity and so forth, and about the Hadron particle accelerator based on a TV program that recently appeared. And he responded back and he said, he wrote about the Earth's orbit and the gravity involved in staying in orbit, and he figured out with a pencil and paper and a formula he has in his head what the average radius is of the Earth's orbit. And he did this without a calculator in prison. And yet the paperwork says he has poor problem-solving skills and doesn't understand the assignment cycle. I feel like rolling my eyes in disbelief. The themes of my my brief comments are primarily extended awareness and impact. This is what I wanted to write on or to discuss, but I'm sure that my time will run out, so I'll make it quick. Just be aware that all regulations, directives, and actions within the criminal justice system affect more than the inmate and the personnel within the system. It also affects the general public, and they need to be acquainted that they're dealing with human beings and not just people who can be discarded or disregarded. First, there's the immediate family that must be considered. That's the spouse and children, the extended families, the father and mother of the inmate, as well as the spouse's family. Don't forget the inmate's brothers and sisters. All of these people are affected somewhat by the direct action on one person. And there's the spouse's in-laws. There's close friends and their families, extended relationships such as former work associates, neighbors, organization or club associates, and church members. And realize that many of the inmates have been church members. And last but not least, the taxpayers are affected by these decisions. Things happening within the criminal justice system that affects the inmate also impacts these people. The impact is so diverse as it affects these people that we cannot imagine all the uncountable ways. Granted, the list extends out from the inmate, the ripple effect is lessened. Nevertheless, there's a ripple effect that goes much further, and many people are aware of. And we must make this aware, make the general public aware of the impact that's going on. Thank you.
Must begin by addressing the deficiencies within our indeterminate sentencing method. The entire, sorry. The entire system is fraught with subterfuge and injustice, from arrest and the judicial process to corrections and the actual sentencing parole authority. Many of the states have abandoned the concept of indeterminate sentencing, but as demonstrated by Utah's higher incarceration rates, the longer amounts of time offenders spend in our prisons, and the decades of consistently high rates of recidivism, the outside cost of maintaining such a futile system alone should compel our state representatives to take immediate action to abandon such a debacle. The criminal judges within our state have been made effectively impotent when it comes to sentencing. They actually intend to send offenders convicted in their courts. There is no truth in sentencing in this state due to the fact that neither judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, offenders, or even the very victims of the crime themselves have any clear idea of what an offender's sentence will ultimately be once he or she is turned over to the unregulated authority of the Board of Parole. Judges are the very people who are the most qualified to make decisions as a matter of law, but we have made them powerless over the length of sentences they themselves impose. We leave these complex decisions instead being made by a group of unelected and appointed political cronies, many of which who have little experience in the criminal justice field. Our indeterminate scheme has been deemed by higher courts to be statutorily valid thus far. Many challenges of its legality continue to flood the courts by desperate prisoners due to the injustices experienced throughout the process. From the plea bargains that are unethically achieved via subterfuge and empty promises by prosecutors to the very real changes to a prisoner's actual sentence that the board is somehow allowed to do without judicial procedure, such as natural life. There is no clarity of consequences for offenders either. The very structure should be abandoned or at least very least drastically remodeled. The model penal code is declared parole board in general to be a failed institution. The document specifically states that no one has documented one example of a parole release system that has performed reasonably well in discharging its goals. For decades now, the state of Utah has been deemed one of the worst records for recidivism. Either the board is incapable of determining who is parole ready, or they are simply unwilling to release the prisoners they actually are. More than likely due to the social prejudice and political pressure associated with certain crimes, particularly violent offenses, even though evidence-based statistics have shown these types of offenders are the least likely to recidivate. If taxpayers were investors in the board of corporation, the entire body, as well as the policies, would need to be overhauled before we went bankrupt. There were no means available through which the board can be held to account for its failures to parole the right offenders from prison. In fact, the board isn't even required to document or explain in any comprehensible detail why it makes the decisions it makes. It is insulated absolutely by legislative action against any and all legitimate scrutiny of its methods. And House Bill 348 does very little to rectify it, if at all. Rather than reining in the board for the irrefutable failure of the state, instead granted the board unprecedented authority to continue defaulting in their duty, unencumbered by any checks and balances. This lack of oversight of regulation, I believe, has engineered an attitude of apathy, cavalier conduct, and unscrupulous practice amongst the board members. Board decisions are made arbitrary with very little evidence-based considerations and results in such a wide-ranging outcome for the exact or similar crimes. The actual sentencing guidelines and even judge or prosecutor or granted recommendations very often, most often ignored. The hearing themselves have become more of a retrial and resentencing of the offender's crimes, mostly done without legal representation, and they have by then they are actual official review for parole suitability, and the board has even permitted to change its sentence to natural life in spite of court's prior ruling or offender's plea agreement. Over $4 million is budgeted for the Board of Pardons in 2016 according to the state budget. This is $4 million getting wasted on a redundant judicial function that could indeed be carried out by our judges. Imagine what we could use this funding on lieu of in the Board of Pardons. There are state-of-the-art software programs which could, and in some cases, do the work of dozens of board members and much more effectively. It could be used towards funding the actual offender rehabilitation programs, which is currently in desperate need of more funding and new ideas. If this state and our legislature are honestly invested in reforming our system of criminal justice, we need to prioritize the following actions. First, put a freeze on plea agreements being utilized by the courts unless the Board of Pardons agrees to be bound by any and all agreements and assurances made therein. Second, we must abandon our indeterminate sentencing scheme and put judicial power and authority back in the hands of our judges. Third, we must legislatively mandate absolute transparency within the court's process and establish clear, consistent, and compulsory parole regulations. Lastly, we must invest more resources in quality, not just qualified correctional staffing, rehabilitation, and educational programs for all types of prisoners, and state-of-the-art risk assessments for parole considerations. Thank you.
Okay, next, Audra Rogers, Roger Williams, and Marion Greenland, Brianna R., and then Tanya.
Hello. I pondered what I would say tonight. My husband is having his second board hearing this week. And so he told me what was in his blue file, and you may not know what a blue file is, most of you probably do. But it's what is given him that is in the board's, also copies are in the board's file. And he was to look over it and see if there were any mistakes in the blue file. Well, I want to discuss a caseworker's report and a therapist's report. And I'll just try to do it as briefly as I can. My husband's caseworker said that he had a drug addiction when he was age 18. And this is entirely false. I attended high school and college with him between 1950 and 1958, a long time ago. We didn't have drug addicts much then. He was one of the nerds in the high school, highly intelligent, belonged to the chess club, and was conscious even at that age of good health habits. He never drank alcohol or used drugs. He did not smoke or drink coffee or tea. His family did not do it either, and he was not even a member of the LDS Church. I almost laughed when my husband told me this over the phone. His caseworker also said he graduated from high school, and that's it. But he didn't mention that he was at college and also attended graduate school, and he finished his course for a PhD in physics. His caseworker said he had no plans for employment upon parole. Of course, he's 79 years old, but Ernie says he will never retire and tells everyone about his energy-efficient engine invention and his natural formula lotions. He is constantly inventing things. His caseworker said he had no transition plans. Ernie is involved in a pilot transition program which includes detailed daily events for 90 days and is written down on about 16 typewritten pages. Now, how could the caseworker get this wrong? Okay, the therapist, Dr. C, interviewed him once in late 2015, just last month. And then Ernie was assigned to another therapist. Well, Dr. C made his report to the board. He could not have known much about Ernie from one interview. In his recent report to the board, I suspect he just followed the 2014 report by the therapist, Mr. B, who led Ernie's former group therapy in prison. Mr. B was frustrated with Ernie's calm attitude and statements and would not believe he was telling about all of his offenses. He did not know Ernie had already attended 11 months of previous therapy before incarceration. Unfortunately, Mr. B lost his professionalism when Ernie later found in 2015 he had been discussed by name in other therapy groups, and new acquaintances at Promontory would say to Ernie, "Oh, you're the crazy one Mr. B told us about." Okay, more about Dr. C. Dr. C's December 2015 report in the blue file was being read by my husband, and his neighboring Sally, we'll call him Sally number 1, also received his packet. Sally number 1 said, "Ernie, how come your name is on Dr. C's report to me?" Then another inmate, Sally number 2, asked Sally number 1, "How come your name is on Dr. C's report to me?" This is evidently a copy-paste mistake, but shows how little differentiation is made between inmates and their therapists. It appears that what fits one fits all. Okay, I'm going to conclude now, if I have the time. The board receives favorable letters from neighbors and friends. Then it receives reports from the caseworker and the therapist, which can contain many mistakes and misrepresentations of the inmate. Now, who is the board going to believe? Naturally, the Department of Correction experts, the caseworker and the therapist. Just think about this. An inmate looks forward 3 years to his second hearing. He has been incarcerated about 4.5 years and has tried to do many things to help his release. His future life as well as his family's future depend on the results of this one board hearing. The board makes its decisions on factual statements in the blue file. What can we do as citizens, legislators, and loved ones to have the key prison employees, the caseworker, the therapist, etc., be responsible to provide accurate, thoughtful reports about an individual and consider him as a unique human being whose life depends upon what is written in the reports they write? Thank you.
Roger.
I want to be recorded, please.
My son committed a terrible crime. He was sexually intimate with his 16-year-old stepdaughter. When he came to me and told me what he'd done, I was heartsick. The enormity of what was facing him was more than I could possibly comprehend at the time. Even though I felt despair, I said, have courage, don't give up, I'll help you through this, we'll get through it together. I had no idea what I was committing myself to at the time. After he was sentenced, I assumed his responsibilities at home as well as supporting him in prison. When he told me he was freezing at night, I sent extra money for him to buy some sweats. When his feet hurt, I sent money for some decent shoes. I have paid for phone calls, written letters, sent articles and clippings to buoy him up, and a myriad of other things. It is a very expensive and stressful full-time job supporting a loved one in prison. No one knows the pain and suffering we go through. No one knows of the expense, the worry, the prayers, the sleepless nights, the fear, the pain that never leaves unless they have been through it. I can only imagine how hopeless it feels to be the person who is incarcerated. The guilt and shame that they feel, the hopelessness and helplessness they deal with on a daily basis. They have a deep desire to make things right, and yet no matter what they do or how much they change, once they have a felony on their record, they are condemned for life. These men and women are our loved ones. They are human beings. They have a home, children, parents, siblings, and friends who love them and miss them, and yet they're kept locked up in cages like they're animals. I began to do some study and research to see if there was something I could do to help. I found the need for prison reform is much bigger than I ever supposed. I became a member of UPAN to learn how I could help. I began writing letters to my legislators, to the governor, to my representatives on the federal level, and to anyone else I could think of. I learned of the high incarceration rates in our country and of the long prison sentences inmates are given. I learned about indeterminate sentencing and how the Board of Pardons operates. The more I studied, the more concerned I became. The enormity of reform that is needed seems overwhelming. And yet, I have learned that there are others who are aware of the need for reform and are working hard to make changes. I express my heartfelt gratitude to our legislators who are willing to help. You men and women who will stand up for our loved ones and fight for their rights are my heroes. I know taking up the cause of prison reform is not a popular one. There are many misconceptions by the public about someone who has committed a crime. Somehow, they are no longer looked at as human beings. They are now criminals who will never change, who are to be feared and locked away and forgotten. I know you're dealing with an issue that is not popular I commend you for your courage in fighting for change. I wish you could really know what it's really like behind bars. There seems to be a disconnect with the information intended for law enforcement and prison officials and with what actually happens. For instance, prisoners have no idea why the Board of Pardons extends their sentences. Caseworkers do not turn in accurate reports about what the inmate has done while incarcerated. And the inmates are afraid to be open and honest about what happens because of fear of retaliation. Many times, the laws you pass and the intended consequences are totally different from what actually happens. Still, I believe in you. You're amazing legislators who show great courage and foresight as you work toward prison reform. I am aware of what you're doing. I appreciate your hard work and efforts. Thank you for moving ahead against great odds and having the courage to fight for desperately needed change. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for caring enough to do the right thing.
I apologize for being a half hour late. It takes a half hour to get from Draper at 6:30 where I thought the meeting was and rest all day to get there so I could be there. So I'm out of breath.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. The next one on our list is Brianna.
Oh, I've never been to a UPAN meeting. I'll wait then.
Do you need to sign up?
Oh, okay. Brand new.
We're glad you're here.
All right, good. I'll sign up.
Brianna, are you here?
And who's on deck?
And who's after Brianna?
Okay, I'm actually kind of excited that I get a chance to talk because I just have felt like no one really listens. I guess like the people who are more so in charge, and I'm kind of glad I'll get to have a voice for not just me, but other families that I've met and talked to, and kids that I've known that are around my age that I've also been able to talk to that are in similar situations. And so I'm just going to jump right into it. And I think it's hypocritical for Utah to claim that families are important, but instead of helping them, it breaks them up and abuses them. It is hypocritical for Utah to claim that it cares about children, but then it completely ignores and punishes the children of prisoners. Utah has created a broad swath of damage to the family structure of our state, and it is disgraceful. It must start to consider the serious, dire consequences that traumatize families, especially children, when their loved one or parent is ripped away from them. It is hypocritical for Utahns to profess that they practice love, forgiveness, charity, but instead they execute hate, judgment, and vengeance on prisoners and prisoners' families. The state makes us victims too. 8 years ago, the state ripped away my dad. I can't even begin to explain how much our family has suffered because of this. Then last March, after I had done a lot of writing letters and so much praying to be able to visit my dad, and it took a few years, and I was finally approved, and about a year later he was moved again. And he was moved twice. And so he was considered a model inmate where he was, but now we are all being punished even more as he's being warehoused in a county jail a few hours away from here. We have only been able to see and hug him once since last March. We can only talk to him for about 25 minutes a week because it's too expensive. In Draper, he worked in the Ochre Chapel every day. Now he sits in a small cage doing nothing but reading and writing every day. What a waste of a valuable life. Since Since the prison is too full, IPP throws only the good prisoners into county jails where they lose their jobs, their contact visits with their families, and other privileges. This is how the prison punishes good inmates and their families. And I also wrote down some personal experiences that I was saying earlier, how I've known some other kids in similar situations as mine. So my childhood was destroyed when my dad was stolen from me and put into prison. I didn't get to experience all the fun recreational activities I could have that I wanted so badly to do the entire time I grew up. My school education and my attendance took a big plunge, and I felt absolutely hopeless. And I felt like such a failure. All I would do was sleep any chance I could get because it was my only escape, and it was the only escape I had from that I had been living the past few summers. I would sleep for 12 plus hours every single night, along with daily naps that last anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. I would dread being awake every second of the day, and I would be in pain the second I woke up. And I still am like this to this very day. I would get home from school and immediately go to sleep, only taking the time to eat in the few hours I wasn't awake. I've never experienced daddy-daughter dates, and I've never had my father to escort me when I would have just regular dates, and I have never felt safe because I didn't have my protector and provider there. And growing up, I have felt like giving up on accomplishing things because it hurt knowing I wouldn't be able to have my dad there to see them. I graduate soon, and I plan on leaving for an LDS mission in the next year, and every day I stress constantly that my father won't be able to be there to see me accomplish these things. Thank you.
I do what I do because of what we've been through. I'm fighting for all prisoners because of what we've been through. I'm sorry. I wasn't going to do this. But my fighting spirit comes because of what we've been through. Right now, the state of Utah is holding hundreds and hundreds of troubled souls, 33% which are sex offenders, and trapping them in prison for years and decades. My main question is, when are we going to start focusing on and reaching out to help release these souls from bondage? There are so many of them in prison on first-time offenses. Where are their second chances? The Board of Pardons should act as a pardoning board, not a sentencing court operating under star chamber tactics as it currently does. It is a kangaroo court. The role of the board should be to properly make an assessment of the current state of the inmate, not a past judgment of his crime, as it currently does. Research is showing that excessive sentences are cruel and do not promote rehabilitation or public safety. If I could beg the legislators, please work on laws that promote mercy and clemency. The scope of the pardon power of clemency in the Constitution is ignored. It actually remains quite broad and plenary. I mean, there should be no limit on this. When used in a sincere religious manner, the public has indeed supported it. Governor Quinn from Illinois quoted the Bible as his reasoning for commuting these punishments. He described his actions as flowing from a process deeply imbued with faith. Intriguingly, this not only seems an honest reflection of his consideration of the issue, but may have insulated him from some forms of criticism for his actions, because the reaction to his decision was overwhelmingly favorable. So as Governor Quinn's experience shows, seeing clemency as consistent with faith may not only be within the mainstream of American thought, but it may also be politically expedient, provided it is genuine. It is the Constitution that gives us the freedom to talk about clemency as a matter of Christian belief and the imperatives of faith and honesty that demand nothing less. A large percentage of people here in Utah profess devotion to Jesus Christ, and they preach love, forgiveness, repentance, and the importance of family. But I hope that the legislators will use this to make laws linked to clemency. Please make the Board of Pardons start being generous with their pardoning power. The power to save souls is most rewarding and noble. Please make laws to release people, like sex offenders, and reunite them with their families ASAP. Sex offenders have the lowest recidivism rates. Let's start to heal these countless and broken people. It really is the most right thing to do. Politically correct or not, people need to start being brave enough to stop caring about what is wrongly popular in man's eyes and start focusing on what is true and the right thing to do. The topic of sex offenders is the elephant in the room. And at a CCJJ meeting last year, Clark Harms said that the elephant in the room is sex offenders and that it does need to be addressed, and that there should be several off-ramps on the road to prison. First-time offenders should never be thrown in prison, but given alternatives instead of prison. Sex offenders are often very good people who are supporting their families, contributing to society, and are not out causing trouble. They are usually well behaved, and throwing these people away in prison for years and decades does tear apart families. And it causes far more destruction to multiple people than any one microscopic cure and the illusion that one victim is receiving justice just because the state tells them that they are. Justice is never served by throwing a person into prison for decades and letting him rot and allowing his innocent family members to suffer. In addition, justice is never served by teaching a victim to perpetuate victim mentality, which is what our society perpetuates, this victim mentality that nurtures weakness and it fosters the Jezebel spirit. Forgiveness is the magical ingredient, the one and only ingredient that truly, genuinely heals and empowers. It should be taught more often, not only to victims, but to society as a whole. I have seen studies showing that any sentence longer than 7 to 10 years is akin to kicking a dead horse. It's overkill. It does no good to anyone. It is expensive to taxpayers. It traumatizes and victimizes his innocent family members. It destroys instead of repairs him, and it pays back nothing to his original victim. There is no justice in any of this by any stretch of the mind. It is complete destruction, and it is unconscionable. It costs $30,000 a year, roundabout, to incarcerate someone in prison for a year. This comes from uscourts.gov. It costs $3,900 per year to supervise someone in the community. So it is a no-brainer to the budget, if budget really is a factor. May we please start discussing the release of these people and reuniting them with their families. May we start to heal these broken people now. It really is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Next will be Elvina, is that right? Then Billy, and then myself, Kelly, and Linda.
By the time I got there, it was all said when I thought, what's the sense?
Again, my name is Elvina, and I want to thank representatives that I personally invited that came, and I'm so grateful that you guys came. The things that I want to talk about is I understand that a lot of us family members and friends have expressed like how inmates incarceration has affected the family, and I understand that they shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place. I understand that concept. But I do grasp everybody else's feelings about how it affects everyone else. On that note, the reason why I wanted to speak was because I wanted to talk about the Good Landlord program that was passed just a few years ago. So it's really frustrating because there's lots of different aspects that go into the Good Landlord program. And it's really frustrating, especially for sex offenders, because there's certain guidelines they can't live in certain distances from a school or a park or, just different things like that. And so they have to, it's hard, especially here in Utah, when like there are schools all over the place because it's so populated, so many children everywhere. But anyways, and so the Good Landlord program is a little frustrating because I purposely moved somewhere which was a pretty ghetto part of town, but it fell within those guidelines of where a sex offender could have paroled to. And I have family members and a boyfriend that have have that felony. And I moved into this area under the impression that it would fall within APP's guidelines. But then when I spoke to the owner, who I have a really good relationship with, I'm a good tenant, I pay on time, I'm one of his really good residents that he appreciates and respects. But he said, I would totally let that happen except for I'm a part of the Good Landlord program. I can't let someone with a felony live here. And it was really disheartening because I was like, great, I made all this effort trying to find a place to live and now I have to find another place to live. And as I kept trying to find places to rent, everybody kept telling me they're part of the Good Landlord program and they couldn't rent to somebody with a felony. So it was really frustrating, even though I said I don't have any criminal background. I have a clean record. I have a good job, and it was a little frustrating. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is Salt Lake City. I spoke with the landlord, she's a coordinator of Salt Lake City jurisdiction, and she said that Salt Lake City actually is their Good Landlord program is that they do have the option where landlords can, it's up to their discretion whether they will rent to someone with a felony. But majority of them won't rent to someone with a felony. So it's almost pointless. Where like Ogden jurisdiction and West Valley will not rent to somebody with a felony. So it's almost like, why are they in these programs? Why are they completing these programs and supposed to be transitioning back into society if there's nowhere for them to live? Like, where are we supposed to live? Like, that's my biggest frustration. Like, every day I'm on the phone, like, where are we gonna live? I'm trying my hardest. The second thing is going back to what they've expressed in the matrix with the Board of Pardons. The Board of Pardons, I just don't understand it. Like, back to that one comment about what was the point of having a judge make a sentence? My boyfriend didn't have the money to pay for his registering as a sex offender. So because he wasn't registered, he was sentenced 18 months. He's passed his 18-month mark, and the Board of Pardons, he's going before the Board of Pardons a third time this year, just to find out whether or not he'll even get to parole. Anyway, so he's past the time he was originally sentenced. So I don't understand why the Board of Pardons is, like, there needs to be something, there needs to be some kind of reform on where in the world are they coming up with these decisions. When a judge sentenced it for this amount of time, why are they sentencing it for longer? Just like that lady expressed earlier about 4 years to life. Why was he charged more? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Another thing is the programming in the jail as well, or not the jail, in the prison. So my boyfriend expressed that his frustration is they constantly change therapists. So they constantly are changing therapists. So how are they getting accurate treatment if they have to keep changing so many times? Like, I just don't understand that. Also, one last thing was, also he has a lot of disabilities, and they don't offer any type of help for people with learning disabilities in the prison. They're just expected to follow the guidelines according to everybody else that have to do that program. But what about people who have learning disabilities? He has, like, if he's supposed to succeed and complete this program, how is he supposed to if he doesn't get the help he needs? There needs to be resources. There needs to be, I just feel like I invited a lot of people because, I sent out so many emails to so many different legislatures because I felt like you're who we voted for those spots, right? Aren't they the ones we voted for? What's the point of voting if nobody's going to hear what we say? I really hope that you really do listen to the things that people are expressing tonight and share with the members that you work among, who also can help make a difference in decisions on Capitol Hill and progressing forward for those that are affected by those that are incarcerated. And yes, like I said, they shouldn't have made the crime in the first place, but it does affect us in so many different ways. So please keep that in mind.
So, I got asked to speak when I walked in the door, so thank you very much, because I'm all about, being a voice. I think, like I said, by the time I get there, you guys have covered everything. And, there's so many errors that I see in the system, period, but I think, especially at the prisons, I think where the problem lies is before and after, not in the middle. It's before they get there. So, this lovely country that we live in is, we're innocent until proven guilty, but the system doesn't work like that. You're guilty until proven innocent, and you have to pay for it. And if you don't pay that money out first, so I think there needs to be a system before that's in place that can help counter these, just like there should be a system in the prison that if the board pardon says this is what stands, there's got to be some voice that's a third-party transaction. They can step in and say, hey, hold on. Why did you do this? But there isn't. There's nothing. You just have to live with it. So the before and after, kind of like my sister was saying, there's no resources. So before, like the Native American guy, I don't see him, Roger. Yes, we had got it, quite remember it. But everybody's gone through hard times, whether it's life or family. Now the system throws these sex offenders for life sentences, which destroys families. So that's just another problem that's waiting to happen or to occur. And then when they get out, there's no place to live. You can't live within a school or a park or a gym. But you look at where everything's online nowadays. Everybody's online. So everybody knows Facebook. There's 1 billion people on Facebook. Well, guess what? There's 3.5 billion Google searches every single day. So the kids have to suffer because of sex offenders have to register. Who's got a felony have to register. So whoever is in school can look up whoever lives in that area and see who that is. But guess what? That falls back on the children. So they're getting this after lash for, like you said, the families of the prisoners are now victims. And there's nothing in place. So I think the problem's before and after. And then in the middle. The problem in the middle with prison, so before you go to prison and after, if we just took away the money and greed, and then we took away the structure, the foundation that's inside prison. So you look at people that are already there, that have been there for 20, 30 years, they're training the next person. Well, their mindset's off. Their mindset was off already. So you have 5 generations of people teaching the wrong things, are not even open-minded, so they're just learning the same thing. So especially with felons, you're told or in life, when you're told you're stupid all your life, that's what you believe you're stupid. Guess what? When you're told you're a felon, you're told that before, you're told that in prison, and when you get out of prison, you're told that same thing. Every job application, every housing application, you have to keep explaining yourself over and over and over for that one mistake, or if not mistake. There's cracks in the system. So you hire a public defender, which, crazy, that's also something that should be third-party transaction. They get the same paycheck from the same person that's paying everybody that's in the courtroom. What the heck? So that makes no sense. But so I think our problems before and after in the system is where the problem really is. Everything that's in the middle, there's a couple transactions, but it's what happens before. So we're guilty before proven innocent. You have to pay your dues, and then after, there's no resources for people to get back on their feet. So if you don't have a support system, then you're done. It's impossible to get back on your feet, especially when you're a felon and you can't live in a certain area and you can't get a job and you never left with the skill sets that they gave you in prison because they didn't give you any. There's no rehabilitation going on in prison. There's therapy after therapist after therapist. But you're teaching these people and giving them no skill sets that they didn't have in the beginning. They didn't have those skill sets because they lacked that in their family or that foundation. So they didn't have the skill sets. to get out and apply those skill sets anywhere because they didn't learn any. They haven't learned anything yet. They're lacking those skill sets. So if we teach them skill sets or the resources that they have, or that they don't have, when they get out, they might have a fighting chance. But it's double as hard because you can't get a job if you have a felony. It's like impossible. Or you're good with $8 an hour. Perfect. I hope that person can leave a legacy for their family making $8 an hour because that's the only job they can find unless they create their own business. But there's no resources outside that provide that. So I just thought, since that was covering everything, I would just talk about the before and after. That I think that's where where focus needs to be instead of the middle, because we already know that it's broken. So if we can fix before it happens and after it happens, I think that'll make a big hit. So thank you, UPAN.
You hit kind of both of you on what I have a problem with. Totally agree. Crime shouldn't have been committed in the first place, right? There again, sometimes there's a crime and sometimes there's not a crime. Sometimes things fall through the cracks, different people's perception of what happened is different, and it's all in who can tell the best story in front of the jury. I like this idea of before and after, especially after in the registry. That's my big concern right now. You commit a crime, you go to prison, you pay your reasonable amount of time, stay within your matrix. Do not let the board impose their own sentence after the judge has imposed the sentence. And then you come out and you're registering for the rest of your life. Anyone who thinks that these sex offenders get out of prison and they're done with their sentence is wrong. They get a life sentence from the minute they go in because they have to register for the rest of their lives. Now, are there really bad guys out there that need to register? Absolutely. We all know that. Are there young men out there that had sex with their girlfriends in high school and the daddy didn't like it, so they put him in prison for 5 to 10 to 15 to life, depending on the judge? Absolutely. Does that young man need to go home from prison and register for the rest of his life? No, he does not. We can there's documented stories, countless stories, of young men who have gone home from prison, back to that same girlfriend, gotten married, had children, and lived wonderful, happy lives together, of course, without mom and dad, and struggling every single day to make ends meet because everywhere he goes, he has to register as a felon. He can't take his children to parent-teacher conference. He can't take his children, or her children, I don't want to discriminate here, take their children to the park because, you know, they are sex offenders. They're not sex offenders. They're young people who have made mistakes. We all make mistakes in varying degrees. I have learned nothing throughout the last 5 years that our son has been incarcerated, is that really good people sometimes make really stupid mistakes.
Amen.
And they should not be punished for the rest of their lives. Go through the process, do the programming, learn what your mistakes were, learn from those mistakes, and have an opportunity to make a life for yourself when you come out. That's what I'm hoping for. That's the aftercare I'm hoping for. Thank you.
This is my first time being here too, and I'm a little nervous. This is getting to be a common theme. My biggest complaint is with the Board of Pardons too. My husband was convicted of a second-degree felony financial crime. His matrix was 33 months, and he will serve 400% of that matrix before we get to a rehearing.
Gotcha.
Nonviolent crime, his caseworker actually recommended 18 months. His parole officer, this is his second offense, so I kind of, I'll even give him a little leeway on that, but even with it being his second offense, his matrix was still only 33 months. His parole officer recommended 3 years, the hearing officer recommended 5 years. The Board of Pardons came back with our letter said 10 years to a rehearing. He doesn't even have a date. For a non-violent crime that I paid off most of that restitution already. And I just don't understand why they don't have to follow the matrix. What's the point of having a sentencing commission that looks at all the aggravating and mitigating circumstances if we're not going to follow any of that? How do they get to 500, 400, 500% of a person's time? I just, I don't understand that. And I actually, listening to you guys, I feel very lucky. He's in a good place. He has good programming. He is in a county jail. We don't get contact visits, but we do have barrier visits, so we don't have video visits. But I've learned about sex offenders since he's been in prison. We're starting his 7th year on a 33-month matrix. It's pretty, but I've learned a lot about sex offenders, and I've met some of those guys, and I think it's sad, and they don't have treatment. And where do you live? And that's the other thing we're going to face. He's a felon. Where do you live? He's on the financial registry. He's going to have to register. So yeah, he shouldn't have committed the crime, but I think our Board of Pardons needs to somebody needs to check on that. There's no process to go back and say you made a mistake. I wrote to the Board of Pardons, and the letter I got back from them, they should be ashamed, seriously. They literally told me, we're not changing our mind, and it pretty much said, put up or shut up. I mean, it was rude. And his mother pretty much received the same letter. This woman's 82 years old. They sent her pretty much the same letter. So, like I said, my complaints with the Board of Pardons, and when I saw House Bill 248 passed, I was very encouraged. There's nothing in there that compels them to do anything different. They're doing business as usual. There's nothing changing.
Warehousing.
And 4 months off of a 10-year rehearing, 4 months off of 10 years when it should have only served less than 3, I don't get it. And our story is not uncommon. So, anyway, thank you.
What am I just saying now?
The same thing. Keep repeating it. Somebody will get it.
It's important that they know that it's the same story. We're old guys, they ought to put in prison.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. The same.
Well, I have a son that committed a sex offense as well. He'd never done anything wrong in his life. He's never had a ticket, probably. But he did commit the crime, and wasn't what they perpetuated that he did, but he had no voice in his hearing. He was given a matrix of 44 months. And by the time this person that presided over the hearing, who was horrible, I've never seen a person like this. He was very biased. He listened to the victim, who, by the way, was lying through her teeth because we lived with her. But my son was not given the chance to talk. And this man was so ignorant to our whole family. We had 14 representatives of our family at this hearing. And he degraded our family for supporting our son, which does not make any sense. But anyway, so I think that it would be best to go to a computerized system and get rid of the Board of Pardons. I see no sense. Why are these people there? And who gives them the right to do what they do? They have no accountability. Who looks and sees what they do and sees that they're doing it right? So yes, people need to pay for what they've done for a reasonable amount of time. But 44 months is nothing compared to 10 years that he got. And then that was 10 years, like she said. That's just for a hearing. That isn't even a date. And he has 2 twin sons that are beautiful. that my other son and myself, or my husband and I, do take care of. And they're missing out on their dad, and he loves those boys to death. He is a good man, and I'm sure a lot of these people in here, their sons and daughters are good people, just like she said. They need a chance. Another thing is, what good is the 5-year redetermination that they give these long-term prisoners if the inmate cannot take the program he needs to obtain to be released from prison earlier than that 10 years? There's no sex therapy classes for them to take. There's no money for these inmates to be rehabilitated. And yet everyone wonders why our prisons and jails are so overcrowded. We have more prisoners in the US than in China. Why can't an inmate take the sex therapy class on a private basis? Why can't they be released in their 3 years, come out and pay for sex therapy classes on the outside, go to work, and still be with their families? Amen. Doesn't that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Long-term prisoners are farmed out to jails because they're overcrowded prisons, yet they have no amenities in these jails. They have no exercise room, no work, and they'd love to have a job to be able to work, no educational classes or anything. Yet these jails are paid by the state to house these inmates. Long-term inmates should be able to visit their loved ones the same way they do in prison, sitting across the table from them, not on a video screen. And luckily, we just barely got a video screen at Kane County, right? And the Board of Prisons need more individuals who are not prosecutors, but defenders or psychologists to be more fair. They are making decisions based on emotions, if they like an inmate or not. They don't know what kind of person that inmate is. A first-time offender should be given a chance to prove to society that they can become decent citizens. This would reduce the amount of prisoners and overcrowding in prisons. That's what I gotta say.
Okay, Byron, Leslie, Glenn, Michael. You guys know who you are, right? So I want to say last names.
I didn't realize how many different problems there were. I've really this has been a learning experience for me. I just want anyone who may watch this to realize that we realize that our loved ones have committed offenses. And they do have to pay the consequence for their crimes. We realize that. And I'm glad some of you have mentioned that. But what we're talking about here is the penalty is way extreme beyond what the crime is committed. Okay? My son had an original hearing in November of 2009. So he went in just before his 21st birthday. I have a concern about the matrix time that has been changed. My son received a letter from the Board of Pardons, and I have a copy of that letter, in August of 2008, stating the guidelines was 195 months. That's 16 and a quarter years he was sentenced for, okay? He has now been incarcerated for 216 months. He's been in there now for 19 years. Now he has a new timeline, and I just got the redetermination review, and it's changed to 324 months. So they added an extra 10 and a half years beyond what his initial matrix was. He's been scheduled for a rehearing in November of 2022. He has not had any write-ups, no dirty UAs, that's the P test, okay, in which he had to take almost 200 times in his 19 years there. Not a single one was dirty. He completed over 33 life skills classes. Many of them he repeated just so he could be enrolled in class in school. He's taken several times. Of course, inmates are encouraged to utilize their time as productively as possible and to take advantage of all available programming and work opportunities to demonstrate a commitment to change. I contacted someone at the board, I noticed no one's using names, I'm not going to use names, on October 27th of 2015 about my son's redetermination request, which he submitted in July of 2015. Okay, he hadn't received an answer by October. So he told me, what's going on, find out. So I called, okay? She said his paperwork had been filed in error without being processed, and that she would take care of it right away. He received an answer the second day after my call to the board, I mean, which is commendable. I did not realize that 3 or more board members could have reviewed his file so quickly. Within 2 days, and all of a sudden he gets a redetermination? Wow, that's fast. To his credit, during his time in prison, he received an associate degree from SLCC for building construction and management. Also, numerous diplomas. He's enrolled in correspondence schools with the Stratford Career Institute for years, okay? And he's received his diplomas in motorcycle and ATV repair, starting your own business, fashion merchandising and design, bookkeeping, and accounting. Because when he gets out, he'd like to open up his own model RC hobby shop, okay? He worked there at the prison from 1998 through 2002, and then he went to Timpanogos for more schooling. After SLIP, he worked at UCI from 2006 to the present, who has been at UCI for 10 years. I would think that someone who has accomplished so much during this challenging time would be given some consideration. Sometimes I think they want to keep him at his job because he's doing so well at it. I mean, even his supervisors leave for vacation for 2 weeks, and him and his friend run the whole shop. It's in the woodworking shop, okay? Come on, hasn't he proved himself? Okay. It must be difficult for inmates to keep a positive attitude or outlook in the future when they do all in their power to improve themselves and no feedback is given as to why the decisions that have been made are put in place. We would like to understand what is going on so we can deal with decisions made in an appropriate manner. Even the officers at the guards of the prison say, why are you here? You don't have the MO. You shouldn't even be here. They even make plans with him now to go fishing when he gets out, and things like that. He's ready to work. His attitude's been good. He's anxious to start life when he gets out. He's ambitious. I mean, he actually even has a job. I have a nephew that has his own woodworking business who always needs help, and he's afraid to hire people because none of them are consistent enough. But like I said, he's run his shop there for a lot of time. He's got a lot of experience. He's ready to leave. He's ready to move on. But like I said, they added another 10 years to his time. So what can he do? You know, things do need to change. Thank you for your listening.
Good evening. My name is Leslie Hugo, and I am one of the volunteer ministers for the Utah prison system. I serve at 3 of the different facilities, and I've been doing this work for the past 2 years. I started this ministry not having ever known anyone who had served time in prison and not knowing what to expect, with a little bit of nervous apprehension. And I am still surprised at how quickly I came to love this work and the deep level of compassion I feel for the inmates that I serve there. To give you some quick statistics, and there has been some statistics floating around, close to 95% of all inmates eventually are released from prison. Yes, there's a few bad people who will serve life sentences, but most people are released. They need to be back into society as productive members, as part of the families that they came from. On a national average, over 50% of the crimes are drug-related. A lot of these people are in the wrong place at the wrong time when drug busts happen. I know a little bit of those kinds of statistics have been thrown around too. In addition, most people have been victims at some point in their lives. For women in prison, that statistic is over 90%. So again, as has been said, there's like a cycle of a victim mentality that runs in families, and these people I like to think of it not so much, the symbolism is not so much as people behind bars, but they're caught in the net. That really is a better description of how our prison system is and how people get caught in it. All of these people serving time have a family, a neighborhood, a community that they came from. Mass incarceration in this country in general is an utter failure as public policy due to its devastating impact on those who become ensnared in the net of the criminal justice system, and its failure to produce a proportional increase in public safety. With the vast numbers of people that are in prison, it's not that our communities are any safer today than they were before. Nearly 1 in 100 American adults is incarcerated right now. America's prison population has increased over 500% in the past 30 years. The United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and in 2010, the spending that has been, the dollars that have been expended to house and care for these inmates is around $80 billion. Huge, huge, huge expenditure for human lives, for people that are stuck in this system. So many of the young men that I work with in prison are so talented. They express a desire to want to get out, to raise a family, to get married, to have children, to be productive members of society, but they have so many fears. Fears of how they're going to be treated when they get out, fears that they won't escape the parole system, that they're going to end up back in prison again for many of the reasons that have already been discussed. It is a huge waste of talent, of resources, of human lives, with the numbers of individuals incarcerated. Our criminal justice system desperately needs to be overhauled, with more emphasis on rehabilitation and education for the inmates so that we can get them back home to their families and get them back as productive members of our society again. As members of our legislature, I would encourage you to sponsor or co-sponsor new legislation to help restructure how our criminal justice system operates in Utah. And I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to be here tonight.
Thanks to everybody who came here tonight. I'm glad to see that we've had such a good turnout. Especially thank you to our representatives from the legislature who have come. Special thanks to my legislator, Mr. Spendlove, and I'm glad that he responded to me. Frankly, I was thinking he probably wouldn't, but he did. Thank you. I'm sure that you recognize the problem. We have too many people housed in prison, and it's taking up too many prison beds, and that costs too much. And that's the problem to the general public. So, if we want to corral this problem, the best way to do it is to fix recidivism. Recidivism currently stands at about 67%. That's just people recycling back through the prison system and taking up beds. If you want to control recidivism, you have to make the release decision based on factors that affect recidivism. Obviously. But you're thinking, well, don't we do that now already? No, we don't. At least the Board of Pardons and Parole doesn't make their decision that way. They make their decision based on how bad the crime was. Maybe we should enact a law that says that the Board of Pardons and Parole should make their release decisions based on factors that affect recidivism. That sounds like a good idea, but wait a minute. that completely ignores how bad the crime was. So, how bad the crime was is important. But you can't make good decisions, good release decisions, if you're looking at how bad the crime was. You have to make your release decisions based on factors that affect recidivism. What are those factors that affect recidivism? 1, offender attitude at the time of release, including antisocial tendencies. Number 2, education, both scholastic and behavioral. Number 3, ability of the offender to integrate into society, including support from family and friends, ability to get housing, and ability to support themselves. Number 4, plans for dealing with life outside of prison, including avoiding former bad behaviors and former bad relationships. These are evidence-based practices that affect post-prison success. Isn't that what we should be concentrating on? None of those 4 things that I just mentioned was how bad the crime was. So how do you make those decisions that affect recidivism if you're thinking about how bad the crime was? Well, here's how you do it. First of all, think about debt to society. How bad the crime was is the basis for debt to society. We know everything we need to know about how long the debt to society should be at the time of initial sentencing. We should have a decision made at the time the judge gives a sentence. Now, as legislators, you could say, well, here's a range for this type of crime, but the judge looking at this should be able to set a determinate sentence for the number of months that the person will be in for debt to society. And then you should write it down. Because when it's done, it's done. And then the release decision should be made on factors that affect recidivism. Dual mode sentencing supports this type of a program. Criminal justice professionals have muddled in their thinking. Every time they look at it, they think about how bad the crime was. But currently, we have a recidivism rate of over 60%. Do you think that's good? Do you think that that's an acceptable percentage? Do you think maybe we could do better? I ask you to concentrate on fixing the recidivism problem. I would like to issue you a challenge. Anybody in the room? The challenge is simple. It won't take you long. Go to dualmodesentencing.org. Read the first page of it. My name is at the bottom, my email address. Email me back. Tell me what you think of it. If you think it's bad, tell me. If you think it's a good idea, tell me. How many people will take that challenge? Okay. I have some cards with dualmodesentencing.org on it. I'll set them over here. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm here to represent a parolee that wasn't allowed to come to the meeting because his parole officer wouldn't allow it. I snuck him into the meeting in this little take the course. But before I get started with him, I would like to speak to some of the things that people have said here tonight, because I expired my sentence in July of this year, of last year rather. I did 15 years of my 1 to 15 sentence, even though my matrix was a little over 5 years. I can speak to this lady's concern about mistakes on the blue packet, because there were mistakes on my blue packet made by my therapist. I'm a sex offender. The name of another member of my group was inserted in my blue packet, and also his rating as a high risk for reoffenses, even though my testing showed that I was a low to medium risk for reoffenses. So this just totally upset me, and I just decided at that point that I was going to refuse parole. I was offered parole. I refused it. I had 5 years left. This cost the taxpayers $150,000. On top of the $150,000 of doing the 5 years over my matrix until I was offered parole, $300,000 that could have been avoided if I had gotten out within my matrix. Now, I would like to explain Mr. Jim Head's problem. He has a financial problem. He has been paying on a medical bill that he owes the prison $258. He's paid $250. There is no accounting for this. I will now start this and let you listen to what he has to say.
Hello, I'm James Head. I'm on parole from Utah State Prison since August of 2014. This regards my frustrations and problems I'm having with paying a $258.75 medical bill that was acquired when I was on site in prison. Accounting is what this is about. But I am not getting anywhere with the Department of Corrections Financial Services Bureau. This is the part that I'm talking about. 5 payments that I have paid towards my medical, $250. First one, 9/8/14, $25. 10/3/14, $25. To Access Corrections in St. Louis, $100, 6/23/2015. $50 on September 21st, 2015. Not one dime has been accredited to my prison medical bills.
Okay, at that point, I think you have the idea that he is making the payments, but nothing is being accredited to his account. His parole officer is threatening him as a result. He's saying, you've got to make the payments. He's saying, I'm making the payments. They're not showing up on his account. He has all the receipts. I have all of the receipts and the letters that we have sent, because I've been helping him. I have internet access, he does not. So this is an ongoing problem. One question I have to ask is, why are we sending our accounting jobs out of state to an accounting firm that cannot seem to account for the money that an inmate is sending in? We have to do something. We can do something right here to make it easier for parolees. They have a hard enough time as it is. I have no doubt that I made the right decision when I refused parole. When I hear some of the horror stories that parolees are telling, the hard times they have, the hoops that they are forced to jump through, and I feel that when you add extra burden to the parolee, you have an extra burden by threatening him with sending him back because he's not making payments that he is making. Well, that's just not right. So I would like to be, at any point, if any of our representatives would like to speak with me privately, I would like to speak to a number of the things that people have said here tonight. I know that we could use inmates as a resource at the prison if we just put our mind to it. Yes, I committed the crime that I went to prison for. I was guilty. I did my time, more than my time. I've learned from my mistakes. But I was also a resource while I was in prison, but I wasn't appreciated. We can do better. Thank you very much.
Thanks for everybody's patience. We have just enough time for the people left on the list, if we all go by the 5 minutes. Cheryl, Jim, Carl, Molly, and Norma.
Thank you very much, and thank you legislators for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time too, and hope that I'm in agreement with so much that's been said tonight, and appreciate everyone's thoughts and things that they've said. I know that it's true. I've been having this experience for the last 10 years. Mine's a little bit different story. And this was a letter, I'm reading from a letter that I wrote in desperation a few months ago to Senator Orrin Hatch. My name is Cheryl Burke. I'm the mother of Ryan David Burke, inmate number 186355, currently incarcerated in the Gunnison, Utah Correctional Facility. In 2007, Ryan was convicted of, as a sex offender and sentenced 15 years to life. Although convicted of these alleged crimes, he was wrongly convicted and is innocent. My family and I have fought in the court system for the past 8 years for his freedom. The first judge who saw Ryan's case said, "Not enough evidence is even here to put this through, but because of what it says, I have to." And on it went. About 4 years ago, we presented evidence to the courts that alibied Ryan's whereabouts on the morning of the alleged crimes. Ryan's attorney, original attorney, admitted in an affidavit that he did not investigate as Ryan had asked him to do, evidence that was exculpatory to the case and would have changed the outcome of the trial. Judge Paul Mon, who was Ryan's original trial judge, stated that he remembered Ryan's case. He looked carefully at the new facts that were brought forward and felt that this new evidence called for his convictions to be vacated. We were overcome with joy at that time, feeling that the courts had supported Ryan's individual rights and welcomed a new trial with this new evidence as our defense. We thought a new trial would be granted or that Ryan would be released. For 4 more years, we have waited and fought and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed from family members on our son's defense as the Attorney General's office appealed that decision. Ultimately, the appellate court reversed Judge Mon's decision to vacate Ryan's convictions. We next presented our case to the Utah Supreme Court, still hoping and trusting that they would uphold Judge Mon's decision because he was the trial judge and ultimately has the most clear and unbiased knowledge of the original trial. Sadly and unfortunately, they did not. We received a 1-line notice of denial with no explanation or reason. This has been devastating to our family and especially to my son Ryan, who battles through prison life, as you all know about, and as he faces the excruciating challenges of being incarcerated with the accusations and convictions that he carries, and with no foreseeable end to this insanity. Senator Hatch, I am contacting you because we currently have a petition for writ of certiorari in the office of the Supreme Court of the United States. We made the decision to move forward with Ryan's case at this level, realizing that our odds may be rather slim because of the thousands of cases that are brought forward to this court each year, but we also believe in our son, and will take whatever chance we have to fight for his individual rights and ultimately his freedom. I want to make sure that Ryan's case is looked at with focus and attention. Without someone taking this seriously and looking carefully at the facts of the case and without bias, my son is facing life in prison for crimes that he did not commit. If there is any way for you to draw attention to this petition for Ryan, my family and I would be deeply and eternally grateful. I once believed in justice and fairness for all U.S. citizens. Now, after 8 years of being immersed completely in the courts at this level, I ask myself, is the system in place to protect the rights of each individual? Or is the system in place in certain circumstances to protect the system itself? I realize that mistakes are made. It is not a perfect system, but what does it take to undo those errors and still protect the rights of each individual? Will you help us? I ask you tonight, are we protecting individuals in these circumstances in prison? And I hope that as legislators that you will look at every circumstance and every individual and not treat every crime the same. Thank you.
Jim.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Jim Darter. I'm 28 and a half years producing the coal that you use up here to light turn on your lights, turn on your heat. I'd like to recognize Fred Cox and I think maybe some other representatives. Stand up, Fred. And this is one of our representatives for our others in the back also that if you want to volunteer. I know Brad, but he's my representative. Anyway, I said my background is 28 and a half years, 29 years coal mining. I had no concept about law and legal procedures when my ex-son-in-law got in trouble. He told me that his cellie, a fellow by the name of Dave Huckabee from prison, told him that his second appointed public defender told him that his job was not to defend him, but to see that he was legally prosecuted. Now, the reason why I say that is I only wished that the public defender that had handled on my recommendation, my son's case, did do a situation where he did or see that he was legally prosecuted. We have serious problems in the Wasatch behind, and what I would like to, we've been beating up pretty hard on the Board of Pardons, and I think that's very justifiable. But I'd like just to look forward a little bit. I prepared 6 pages of documents, and I wrote big so I could read them easy. But I would like us to look forward to a proposal that is coming out of the administration of the courts. I attended the last CCJJ meeting as a Commission on Crime and Juvenile Justice, and what I was talking about was my proposal, which I titled the Utah Public Defenders Commission proposal. And I was very quickly told that the court had a proposal in ground and work in the process. And I then emailed with Dan Becker, who's the administrator, the chief executive administrator for the he's the executive director of the administration of the courts. And he led me to where their report was and where the proposal was, and I've looked at this very closely. I've got some serious problems with the report where they say that a public defender should meet minimums, standards for doing defense activities. Case law is there that says exactly what a public defender is required by law to do. That never happened in our case. This report that was prepared by the administration of the court goes back to 2011. This was completed October 2015. So this is not a 15-minute proposition. This is not a quick, the report that I read through and that the proposal is a little bit ambiguous in that the report does not endorse, county to public defender contracts, but then proposes a model contract to do exactly that. The AOC proposal is to create a new section of law. This will be under Title 77, Chapter 32, a new Part 8, and that'll be entitled the Utah Indigent Defense Commission, UIDC. This would apparently supervise the public defenders. That's where I have a problem. It was said tonight, you have an instantaneous conflict because the county court, the county commission pays for, number one, the county attorney's office. Number two, the judiciary. It comes out of the county or municipal, if it may be, and they pay for the public defender. There is no adversarial process when the prosecution directly controls the finances, because without his recommendation, the county commission doesn't rehire. What needs to happen, this report, this proposal, what I said, the Part A, needs to be changed in terms of the money that's being assessed by the Utah Indigent Defense Commission needs to be taken out of the counties and put in the state commission. They should hire the local lawyers, the local public defenders. This would eliminate any conflict of interest right there. And I've got pages and pages, about 8 pages worth of key small level issues. One of them would be to the state of Utah under the Bounds decision. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. Is where the United States Supreme Court ruled that the state has to provide, the prison has to assist inmates. I could see the Utah Indigent Defense Commission taking over that responsibility. Thank you.
Okie doke, I scribbled down some notes. I left my other notes at home. Some of you know me, some of you don't. The legislators are here. I did 20 years in prison. I've been out for about 10 years. And because a lot of the comments said here today, the kids haven't done anything wrong. The families are usually the ones suffering from the person being locked up. So I put together a scholarship for children of inmates. So let me throw that out there right now. And I just updated my flyers, and we'll be accepting applications starting February and ending on April 15th. It should be real the deadline on that. So, now I have some flyers for anybody interested in setting out to their loved ones. Okay, I've been involved kind of with the criminal justice reform for a while, and wrote a lot of other legislatures as they was discussing it, and it came up. And then when I looked at the criminal justice report that they paid the state to do, most of their recommendations were the same thing I sent them before I saw that. So, I don't know, if you need any information on criminal justice reform, look me up. I'll tell you and save you some money. Okay, right now, I'm going to encourage you first to support education out in prison. When I was out there, probably the best thing they had going on was building trades, auto mechanics, etc., etc. A skilled trade. I think they have business management, they have culinary arts. Give them inmates a skill so when they get out, they can get back to work. Okie doke? So that's my main, I think you really need to support that. Another thing you need to support, I don't know how much the state is involved with this, but you need voc rehab. Let them people get out, get some tools, get some education, and continue to do well. Okay, I've been out for 10 years. I got out, I got voc rehab. I did some building trades in there. I've created scholarships. It's given back $10,000 to the community and over $4,000 in gift certificates. And thank God I got out when the economy was working. I cannot imagine being paroled during the recession where regular people couldn't get a job. Then if you're getting out, especially if you've done 10 to 12 years or 5 years on your work record, you're not looking very good. Which brings up my next point. Okay, the other thing I've been pushing for a couple of years now, and it's pretty new, it's ban the box. I don't know how many of you know what ban the box is. Okay, no, that's where you're not asked right off the top whether or not you've been convicted of a felony. At least check out and see if the person has the skills you're looking for. And then see what kind of conviction they may have had. Maybe it was 15 years ago for something petty when you was 18, I don't know. Maybe the conviction you could not get the job you're looking for. I mean, if you're running a daycare center, you probably don't want a sex offender in there. No offense, but I mean, you see what I'm saying? But if you're working on an oil field out in the West Desert, I'm not sure how many crimes would stop you from doing that. So at least check out your credentials and give everybody an education out there. Okie doke, let's see what else I got down here. Okay. Okay, we've touched on some other parts. Okay, there's a theory in business and stuff, it's diminished returns. I mean, after you've locked somebody up for so long, what are you getting from it? Diminished returns. You're losing money, they're probably losing incentives to do any better, and so you're back to probably square one. So let me go on that, okay? And I agree, public defenders, and probably most of them don't get paid that much, and everybody's probably had their experience with them. I don't want bad mouth them. At least they're supposed to be doing something. Some of them actually try, and some of them don't give a shit. So, I mean, and the other thing is that there are people that's out there on wrongful convictions. Again, public defenders file an appeal. There's no access to the courts, people. I'll straight up with you. I mean, especially for a pro se inmate or a poor person. So anyway, that's where I'm at. So hopefully you can gather a little bit something out of that. All right. I got some updated flyers to send out to your people. If you've got a parent out there, you want to know about this scholarship. If you've got kids or parents or anybody out there with kids, you want to know about this.
Thank you, Carl. Hi, I'm Molly Prince. I'm president of Utah Prisoner Advocate Network. I'm also a sex offender therapist for the last 20 years in the community. I worked on contracts with the Department of Corrections for other agencies, and now I have my own practice. So I've worked both sides of this because I also have two nephews that are incarcerated. Both were incarcerated in Utah. I now have one in another state and another one still here. So it's been an interesting journey for the last 10, 20 years. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's been said, but I would like to add to. First of all, I'm really excited, and I hope the legislators that are still here that have hung out with us, thank you for staying this long. There should be the legislative board audit coming out in January, and I have no clue what it's going to say. I know that a lot of our families and our inmates and loved ones have contributed information to that, but what I would really like to encourage everyone up on our Capitol Hill to do is pay attention to whatever's in that report. And if there are recommendations that the board needs to change certain things, I don't know exactly how that process works with you guys, but I really hope you hold them to it. The board is the one agency that just doesn't have to be accountable to anybody but the governor, and I just can't imagine that Governor Herbert or any governor has enough time to pay attention to what the board's doing. He's got enough other things on his plate. So the other good news that I'm hoping for is that we do have, yes, she's a public defender, but she's on the defense side. Denise Porter, I believe her name is the new nominee for a board member spot to take the place of Jesse Gallegos, who is retiring in March. And we were fortunate enough to get a heads up so that we could write and encourage an appointment of a defense attorney versus the prosecutors that were the other candidates. I really hope that the legislature will pay attention to whatever's in that report, because everything that's been talked about tonight happens, and it happens on a pretty frequent basis. We're a small group out of 7,000 inmates in the Utah State prison system. You know, this is a small group. UPAN's families, we have 400 UPAN families. We have 200 extra inmates that don't have families that are involved. So 600 people is a very small percentage, less than 10%, that are involved in what we're doing in terms of trying to stay posted on what's going on and writing letters. So I can only imagine how many other people are out there that these things have happened to that we don't know about. The next thing I would like to talk about, and because I'm a sex offender therapist and I work with people on parole and probation, I really am invested, and I hope you will be too, in the future. I call it parole success. I can't remember what the Department of Corrections is calling it. But everything that's been talked about here, from good landlord programs to the challenges with lifetime registration, I agree with registration that it needs to be tiered and based on, you know, the crime, the severity of the crime, the multiple times, you know, if it's a repeat offense, that kind of thing, versus just you've got a 10-year registration, or if you've got a 5 to life, then you're going to register for life. I think when those kinds of issues come up, you need to look at them. And I really appreciate your being here to educate yourself on some of these issues. And finally, this is a very unpopular subject, and my representative, Mark, where did he go? He left. Okay, well, I've spoken with him in my office, so I guess this will suffice. But, you know, I keep being told by various individuals and representatives that sex offender treatment funding is just not a popular issue. But when we have 2,500 to 3,000 sex offenders sitting in Utah State Prison or in county jails as a state inmate, waiting to be involved in sex offender treatment, and we haven't had additional funding for sex offender treatment within the Department of Corrections since 1996. It's still funded at the same level as it was in 1996, 20 years ago. And I don't know how many sex offenders, that's the year I started doing sex offender treatment. And I don't know how many sex offenders there were in the system then, but I bet it wasn't 2,500 to 3,000. I bet it was much lower. So we need to really fund sex offender treatment so people are not sitting in limbo. There's a window, as a therapist, there's a window in anybody's life when they're having problems, where they're open to change and to learning and to figuring out why did I do what I did, or what problems did I have that I need to address. And when we make people sit for 10 and 15 years, am I almost out of time? Okay, 10 and 15 years without treatment and then expect them to get into treatment, we're doing them a disservice. I work with people who've been locked up for 20 years that couldn't do sex offender treatment because, contrary to popular opinion, there is not a special needs sex offender treatment program in the prison. If you cannot read and write, you're not going to be successful. If you're developmentally delayed, learning disability, or mentally ill, you're not going to be successful. So I really hope that when sex offender issues come up, that you guys will be receptive to examining them. Thank you very much.
I'm getting to understand how the system works.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Even missed that football game. The kids would wonder about that. I have no agenda. I have no children in the prison. I have no relatives in the prison. For some reason, I've been a volunteer at the prison for over 30 years. I started the JC program out there when I was 30, the square foot gardening program. I teach college. I used to teach college at the prison for Salt Lake Community College. I loved it. Unfortunately, that program was dropped. In fact, after that, one of my classes, we collect over 10,000 books for the Utah State Prison. My classes did that. Great. So I'm just kind of aware. I've been in that prison hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I used to be a youth corrections supervisor. I understand kids getting in trouble. I was giving a lecture once to about 100 inmates, and there was a state senator sitting there. And I didn't understand the word matrix. And I remember somebody saying asked the senator and said, "Do you know what the matrix is?" And I won't say who it was, and he said, "Well, I think so. Could you explain it?" And he explained the matrix system. Then he asked those people incarcerated, "What percentage of you are over the matrix?" And somewhere between 80 to 90% of them were over the matrix. And that's when I thought, this is a problem. This is a problem. And it pissed me off. Excuse that. You know, I'm a college professor. I'm communications, and that's what really woke me up to it. A couple quick thoughts. I had a class that I taught there, and I had 2 students in it, just 2. I had 15 students. One of them got out. He was a child. He was had sex favor, and bottom line, got out after 3 years. And he has made legally over $1 million since. Legally, what he did was he read over 2,000 nonfiction books when he was there. Somebody talked about recidivism. So much of it is through technicality. Look at the technicality. Oh, you didn't commit night? Go back. So it isn't always reoffending. Another thing is education. The higher the education, the better chance of not coming back. Since I have a master's degree from Utah State, they pulled that program. They pulled the program from Salt Lake Community College. I personally, and Dr. Don Wright, and other professors have gone to the prison, have gone to the legislature, say, we will provide a free college education to students. Free. We don't want to be paid as professors. We can get the books. Unfortunately, the prison didn't want it. I also have tried to set up a free transition program. It's a big part. It would start 6 months when they're in, bottom line, and it would be free. I believe there are ways to do it. Let me just, in closing, read something I wrote. I happen to be a writer, written a couple books, and I wrote this to a parole board before I understood the system, so I apologize, but I'll just read it real quick. This was a thought for the parole board, and I'll leave it with whoever wants. Imagine arranging to get a bachelor's degree from college. You're told to take 4 years with certain guidelines, classes, if you will, that once you've attained, you'll move on to the next phase of your life. The expenses are arranged, the scheduling and time and energy have been planned out. You're ready to move on. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. You now are in the 6th, 7th, hey, even the 10th year. Still no results, no degrees, stress happens. Not to mention the dorm really wasn't that great from the get-go. Bad heating, bad food, bad mattresses, and bad roommates. Hey, it starts to feel like the movie's going bad. Unfortunately, it's reality. Welcome to prison. You screwed up. Poor judgment, bad judgment, even a string of bad choices, one after another. You go before the judge, he or she sets straight 7 years in the big house with matrix of expectations and guidelines to follow. You mentally get ready for those 7 years, expense of $30,000 to $50,000 per year for your neighbors and strangers to cover your costs. It all adds up. 7 years later, after you've served your time, you were asked to do what you do. The clock keeps ticking and ticking and ticking, 1 year, then another and another. It's a bad dream that turns into a nightmare, and you have no control. No one really wants to listen. No one cares, and you're just another number under the case of a guy who went badly. To the best of my knowledge, these are extremely high percentage of inmates at Utah State Prison living under these conditions. They are real people. Your brothers and sisters, parents, children, cousins, neighbors, you name it, each one of them with dreams, and I go on. There's something wrong. Yeah, there are some bad people. I've met them. I go into that prison, I've been in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And two things people ask me, is it dangerous and why do you do it? I have never been hurt because I treat them as individuals and they will protect me if there were an issue. And number two, more important, I talked to somebody and said, why do you do it? And I said, bottom line is 95% are getting out, and they're going to be your neighbors, they're going to be your kids' neighbors, your relatives' neighbors, and would you rather they were treated like an animal for 5, 10, 15 years, or you actually treat them civilly as a human being, and trust me, they make good neighbors. And bottom line is, I still to this day am willing to be I am a college professor, I'm willing to be a free professor, there are others of us, I'm willing to help on transition program. And somehow or another, there needs to be an accountability to the parole board. I set before just one case of a kid that went in and was incarcerated and was deaf and dumb. And I sat and I watched that parole board look at him and say, well, you're still a bad person. He did everything he was supposed to. Said, now he's in for life. And there's no excuse for that. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I don't know if you got our guests have noticed, but we're all pretty passionate about what goes on down at the point of the mountain and at the countless county jails where our loved ones are at. Sorry, yes?
Can I just make some information for the families here, share some information? I'm State Representative Rebecca Chavez-Hauk. I actually represent the downtown Capitol Hill area.
You're welcome to come to my
Oh, okay, thanks. I'll be really brief. It's just some information that you might be interested in so that you can help move forward one of the policies that you care about. Especially Carl, this might be of interest to you. So again, State Representative Rebecca Chavez-Hauk, and joining my colleagues that are here today. Want to let you know that Representative Sandra Hollins, who was unable to make it, she did get word about the location change, and so she went down to Draper and so Miss Gus. But anyway, House District 23, she's running the Ban the Box bill.
Yeah,
So,
email me.
oh, perfect. So just know the best thing to help move legislation that you care a lot about is to contact your own individual legislators and tell them to support this legislation if it's something you would like to see passed. And tell them to support Representative Hollins in her efforts. And if there are other pieces of legislation that my colleagues are running, I'm sure that they would like to talk about those. But that's the best way that you can help, is when we're running something that's moving the ball forward, is to help us get those things passed. And the best way to do it is to share your stories, just like you've been doing it today, and tie it directly to those pieces of legislation and say why that would make a difference in your life. So we're really excited about that and just wanted to make a pitch for her since she wasn't able to make it. So thank you. And thank you for inviting us.
Are there any other representatives here that would like to get a plug in? We really, really appreciate you guys coming, really.
Not necessarily that I'm running this year. I spent a couple of years working on the sex offender registry, and to get a bill through to allow a judge to pull somebody off for various reasons, and it takes some time to get through. There are 3 bills that I happen to notice. One of them last year passed the House, didn't make it through the Senate. That was HB 240. That was Representative McKiff. It has to do with allowing a judge to at least have some input in that range. So instead of 1 to 15, maybe the judge could change that range a little bit. That bill, again, passed the House, didn't make it through the Senate, and I imagine Representative McKiff will have that back. It looks like it. There's an HB 16, which is, again, dealing with the registry, probably Representative Draxler, he's usually pretty good about running those. There's an HB 30 that had to do with, one of the other comments, has to do with the Good Landlord program. And I looked through that, and I'm not sure if it'll make as much of a difference that you're looking for, but it looks like it's at least trying to change some of that. So there are some things that look like may help based on some of the comments. I just thought I'd mention that.
Thanks for your time.
I don't know how many more times I can say thank you. Just really appreciate our representatives taking the time to be here. We appreciate all of you also being here, taking time out of your schedule, and sorry about the location change. It really makes us feel bad, but the boiler out at Draper died, so they had us change. So without, Molly would like to make a couple of announcements.
Just, Anna's already left, but the ACLU, and we'll get it out on our email, but the ACLU should be doing a lobbyist training on February 9th. Oh, sorry.
So the ACLU, Anna Brower told me that they are planning to do a lobbyist training on February 9th. That's a Tuesday night. It's after our Monday night UPAN meeting in February. So we will get the flyer and information out on the emails and on our website as soon as possible for those that are interested in that training. And then just, if you didn't sign in on the attendance sheet and you do not get our emails, would you please, will you please sign in on the attendance sheet, because we have to do counts of how many people attend each meeting. But if you want to get our emails, please put your email and we'll add you to our list to get our notices, especially with everything that's coming up with legislation this year and our meetings with corrections. Oh yes, there are a few of you, those of you that arrived late, would you just stand so we can all give you a hand, please? Thank you all for coming, and thank you for helping share our concerns.
If the